Good morning. Let's look at some of these major stories which are moving the financial markets so far this morning. And it's going to be a very, very politically charged session today because we've got a lot of focus on Theresa May, Brexit, and the EU-UK relationship. Now, over this week, it's been incredibly busy in terms of everything we've seen from the pound. We've seen big swings, big downside really for sterling, a little bit of upside for that US dollar as well. We've seen cable trading down around 137.80 at the moment. So that negativity has really been in place, and we've seen a lot of headlines come out from around Brexit and from the EU over this week. Now, obviously, the one big one which came in and moved these markets aggressively lower was that from the EU talking about their position on Northern Ireland, and what they want to do, of course, is keep Northern Ireland within the customs union, give them access to the single market, just to stop the possibility of that hard border between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. And we did touch on this yesterday, and of course that was a really important development in the week. Now, Theresa May today will really outline what her views are for going forward on the relationship, political, and this is the key point. It's going to be the political relationship between the UK and the EU in her speech at Mansion House later today at 1:30. That's going to be the real headline focus. Now, she's been meeting with Donald Tusk over the last couple of days. He has been in London, and again yesterday, even during meetings that came out yesterday, we saw Donald Tusk was already saying that it's going to be very difficult for the UK to have a frictionless free trade agreement with the EU, and he kept using the phrase friction. There's going to be friction whenever there is any kind of deal or any kind of trade happening. It's outside of the EU for the UK. So he was particularly negative. Now, we have seen this downside in the pound, and it has been a particularly negative week in terms of the UK, the headlines coming out around the UK. So what we can expect from Theresa May today really is the fact that she's most likely going to really push this positive rhetoric around Brexit. And really what we've been crying out for this whole time is I know it's a bit of a cliche, but is this strong leadership from someone, and that's really where Theresa May has fallen down. That's been where the critics have really come in for her, is where we've been talking about the fact that she really just doesn't seem to have a plan. And let's face it, Brexit is a mess. We have no idea what post-Brexit Britain looks like. We have no idea. The EU don't know. David Davis doesn't know. Michel Barnier doesn't know. And I'm pretty sure Theresa May has no idea either. So with all that in mind, it makes today's speech really important, but it only makes it important because of how the markets are going to move on the back of it. Now, the markets don't move on Brexit headlines because they're positive or negative in terms of the UK economy as a whole. What they move is on the uncertainty levels. Does the headline that's come out create more uncertainty or less uncertainty? Does it focus us in and give us a clearer idea of what Brexit will look like, or does it leave us with the same murky picture? And that's exactly why we saw that big negative move on the back of that story from the EU earlier in the week around Northern Ireland, because we'd already had the discussions within the UK about keeping Northern Ireland part of the UK and having the exact same Brexit for every single part of the UK. But what the EU did was throw a cloud over that and said, well, no, we can't have that, because what we want is the Northern Ireland to stay within the customs union so we don't have this hard border. So it almost feels like we're going over old ground again. So that makes things more uncertain. Now, what we want today is things to be cleared up. We want to hear that there are plans in place. We want to hear what these steps that she's going to announce, what these steps to make Brexit and make the political ties between the UK and the EU to make them work going forward. We want to know exactly what they are and how they're going to work. We need to know that kind of information, and that's really what's going to lead us to the upside. Now, in terms of overall performance of the pound today on the back of this speech, it's going to be very positive from Theresa May. Now, the only problem is whether positivity leads to certainty, and that's the key point. Will that positivity lead to certainty? Will it clear things up? the chances are that on the positive front and the positive tone that she's going to give around the UK, it could well give us a degree of upside. And we've already seen big sell-off. And for me, we've seen a big sell-off especially in cable, but in these sterling pairs. We've seen a big sell-off on the back of news that isn't necessarily very different to what we've already heard. So there is a degree, and there is a school of thought that would say to us, well, if there is a positive tone to this, if we do get a little bit things that are a little bit more certain, then there's quite a lot of upside that we could see in this. We could see a bounce, and we are looking at some of these lower levels at around 37.20s or so on the downside for cable, holding up a little bit, and we've seen a bit of a bounce from those lower points. So there is a degree, there is a school of thought that says that we could see that move to the upside. Now it's going to be, of course, very important, and we won't really be any clearer until Theresa May does start speaking and we see how the market will react. But I think it's a case of Brexit risk is all about certainty or uncertainty. What does this speech breed? Doesn't necessarily mean too much about whether it's positive or negative. It means, does it make the picture clearer or not? And that's what's going to be the big move in terms of cable today. And sterling pairs. But there is also other politically charged stories coming up this week. And of course, over the weekend, there is risk with euro positions, because we do have that Italian election happening on Sunday, March the 4th. That's when the country will go to the polls. So it's going to be really interesting to see how people play that euro position going into the weekend. Is there going to be a feeling that we're going to potentially sort of pair off some of these positions as we get to the weekend? We could well see a slower performance as we move up through the rest of today's session. After this morning's bit of data and after this morning's moves, that's the situation that we could see. But I personally think there'll be an unwinding of positions as we go throughout this session with those euro crosses and potentially European indices as well. Now, of course, we have seen a pretty negative picture in terms of stock markets and equity markets overnight. If we just look at how the US performed, and we saw that real negative performance for the Dow, down over 400 points or so yesterday again. And European markets are that little bit lower as well. So in terms of European equity markets and euro crosses, we could well see that degree of negativity coming in. But let's just look at that Italian election for a minute, and it is really a bit of a coin toss in terms of who's going to win. Are we going to be looking at Matteo Renzi of the Democratic Party really taking over and maintaining his position, winning this election? It's incredibly tight between him and, of course, that five-star movement, the anti-immigration populist party in Italy, and that's Luigi Di Maio. He is the front runner there. Now, it is really, really tight between those two. And of course, it takes us back to a situation when we're looking at the French elections. It's not necessarily as important to the whole Eurozone picture, but it was very much a similar story where we were talking between Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen. Now, we have that similar situation here. It is incredibly tight in terms of this election at the moment. And this whole election has been fought on immigration. The economy has really not been a talking point during this the whole campaigning. It has been about immigration, and Matteo Renzi has really been hanging on. His popularity has been dropping, but he's still one of the front runners in this. He has really small odds to still be to still win this election, but with Luigi Di Maio also running there, and that populist party really gathering a lot of pace, there are risks. So we are looking, again, from market risk point of view, we're looking at having that potential euro risk going over the weekend. If Luigi Di Maio does come in there is that feeling of a little bit more negativity for the euro, because it does throw that question, and it's not as much of an issue as it was with France, because Marine Le Pen had openly said that she wanted to take France out of the European Union. That is a risk in terms of Italy, but it's not as much of a risk. It hasn't been touted as a policy by Luigi Di Maio. So there is that feeling that the negativity could come on the euro if Luigi Di Maio comes in, because there is that small chance that there could be, because the anti-immigration stance, there could be that feeling of closing borders, very much like the Brexit story we've seen here in the UK. But closing borders, and if that is the real push, it could lead to some EU friction between Italy and the European Union. So that's the story there. Now, of course, we do have the US. We've got a lot of movements in terms of the markets in the US. Again, we're looking at that little bit of strength in the dollar, but we have had negativity in equity markets overnight. Again, Donald Trump yesterday surprising everyone, taking this hard stance on the NRA and gun control. So that's almost giving him a real shot in the arms in terms of polls, because that's if he manages to push anything through in terms of changing regulation, background checks, and changing some of the ages in which the legal age to buy firearms in the US. If any changes are made there, it would be incredibly good in terms of his popularity. We know his levels are incredibly low, but if he can push something through in terms of gun control, that would be seen as a massive win for Donald Trump. And it goes completely against what his stance has been previously. His stance, of course, has always been very much siding with the NRA, siding alongside that Second Amendment, and then the whole Second Amendment rally that we see in the US every time there is any discussion around gun control. And of course, this all comes after the terrible shooting that we saw a couple of weeks back. So that has moved markets yet again. So there is going to be a focus on Donald Trump. In terms of data today, there isn't too much coming out. So we could be slightly it could be slightly quieter in terms of macroeconomic data. But really, the focus will be throughout today's session is going to be on Theresa May, focusing on sterling and those sterling pairs, focusing on the euro pairs as well, because of the potential unwinding as we go into the weekend and that political risk in terms of the Italian election. Looking at Donald Trump as ever, but it could be a particularly busy session, especially with the UK in focus and that focus on Brexit.